and the husband of the house was an alcoholic. So he went down to the police station and he asked to see the thief. And the thief said, "Well, what do you want with me? Want the jewelry I stole?" "No." He said, "I don't." "Want the money I stole?" "No." "Want the silver?" "No." Well, he said, "What do you want?" The alcoholic owner of the house said, "I want to know how you got into my house without waking up my wife." Two years ago, we gave 2 telecasts. These are all the telecasts for the last 4 years. And we gave 2 on alcoholism and how to cure it. Now tonight, subject is drunks and alcoholics worth knowing. Is there a difference between the two? Generally today it is held there's no difference, except that a drunkard, they say, the man says, a drunkard can stop drinking if he wants to, but he does not want to, and an alcoholic cannot stop drinking. In other words, there's some freedom in the drunkard, and there's no freedom whatever in the alcoholic. That would seem to be the reasoning. Now, anyone that has ever seen a village drunkard or had a drinking uncle knows very well that the drunkard can't stop drinking even if he wants to. I think the difference between the drunkard and the alcoholic is this. I can illustrate it here on the board. A drunkard is one who likes the stuff. That's the direction of a drunkard. And an alcoholic is one who doesn't like something else. The drunkard has only one problem, namely how to get a drink. The alcoholic has a problem before he starts drinking. You ever hear about the drunkard? The wife said to him, "Where did these 40 empty bottles come from?" He said, "I don't know. I never brought home an empty bottle." And another difference, probably, between the drunkard and the alcoholic is that the drunkard is poor and the alcoholic has money. The drunkard has to go to jail and the alcoholic goes to a psychiatrist. There are no alcoholics on the Bowery. There are hardly any drunkards on Park Avenue. And then as regards men and women, there is also a difference too. And most women are alcoholics in the sense that we define it. They have a problem before they start drinking. They're in flight from something else. And that is evidenced by the fact that an alcoholic woman sometimes will be discreet about her drinking. I heard of one who was courted by a man, and during 6 months of courting, though she was an alcoholic, she never once took a drink in his presence. And after the marriage, that was all she did. And another difference, too, between men and women is that a woman will be much more patient with an alcoholic husband than a husband will be with an alcoholic wife. A wife will put up with an alcoholic husband for years and years. But there aren't many husbands that are that patient. There's something, too, in which they both agree. All alcoholics and drunkards are liars. They're as allergic to untruth as they are to liquor. They will deny they had a drink. "I had only one." I heard of 2 alcoholics that are in a police station, and one of them said, "Look at that machine over there. See it? That's a machine that can tell whether or not you lie." The other alcoholic said, "I married one of those." Now some drunks and alcoholics worth knowing. We're going to give 3. Just part of their stories at the beginning, because obviously the whole point of this telecast is to suggest a cure. We have two drunkards and one alcoholic. Two were poor, one was rich. One drunkard was in Dublin. The other drunkard was in London, and the alcoholic was in New York. The poor drunk in Dublin was Matt Talbot. Matt quit school when he was 13, and he started working for a wine merchant that did bottling for Guinness's stout. Have you ever seen any of the advertisements of Guinness's stout in England? The cleverest advertisements in the world. Last summer, they had the whole length of a London bus covered with a bottle of Guinness's stout. And then underneath it ran the label, ran the notice to read this label: stand bus on end. Guinness for strength. Just like in this country, I think perhaps the finest advertising there is Harry and Bert, huh? See, everybody knows Harry and Bert. I think that represents the highest in advertising, as the lowest in advertising is probably cigarettes. Never an idea, just singing and mere repetition. An onion smells like an onion ought to smell. But we have to get back to Matt. Matt learned to drink when he was 13. Why did they say you have to learn to drink? As if it were metaphysics or archaeology. But he learned to drink at 13, and his father punished him, and then finally had him change his jobs. He became a bricklayer, and then later on went into the lumber business. But Matt was a drunkard. He liked the stuff. He couldn't stop even if he wanted to. And he used to get his pay envelope, take it in to the public house, and then have it all drunk by Monday or Tuesday. One time he was in a saloon, and the fiddler came in. When the fiddler's back was turned, Matt went out, sold the fiddle, came back with the money, treated the fiddler to round after round of drink. The fiddler was having a great time until he found that it was all at his own expense. And the other drunkard was from London. His name, believe it or not, really and truly was Percival. Percival lived in a dive. He lived also in a kind of a government dole. He never worked. And he used to get money by selling his shoes. As he put it, he said, I would sell my shoes at the door of the public house in order to get a drink. He would sell his shirt. And I said to him, Percy, how many shoes and shirts did you ever sell in one night? Well, he said, I would sell my shoes and shirt in a saloon, then go out and people would see me barefooted without a shirt. And he said they'd buy me a pair of shoes, or they'd give me a pair of shoes. He said I'd go to the next saloon, sell it. He sold 6 one night. And the other one was an alcoholic. She was rich. She lived here in New York. And her husband could never tell how in heaven's name she got her liquor. She told me how she got it. She had a big apartment, and she had one room of the apartment that was a museum. She was very fond of colored glass bottles, but real colored glass. And she used to hire a servant at night to fill all of these bottles with liquor. Then as she would gently walk from one room of the apartment to the other, in the morning she would step on a chair, drain the upper glasses first, and then in the evening she would naturally drain the lower ones. Husband never found out how she became an alcoholic. Well, those are our 3 cases. Now for cures. They were all cured. Point number 1. Regardless of how compulsive may be the desire for drink, regardless of how deep-seated the habit be, there is still left in every drunkard and alcoholic an area of freedom. No drunken man is ever like a drunken pig. The assumption today very often is that a drunken or alcoholic, either one. Let this stand for his head. These are his ears here, and he's a happy one. Now, all almost everyone says that he has no freedom at all. He's just impelled to drink. He's under compulsion. No, that is not true. There still remains an area of freedom. Now, when you use ordinary soap, there's always some scum that is left like that. But you watch my angel cleans this off here. He uses X47, our secret formula, over pi 2 raised to the 9th power, occipido frontalis, the convoluted convolution to the metaphorical nuclear colorine. And you'll see how clean his is. But what I meant to indicate here is that there is some area of freedom in every alcoholic and every drunkard. The evidence? Well, first of all, there has to be freedom to start. Certainly we have temptations, we have propensities. But we have to act upon those by an act of will, and a decision and a choice. Then that choice can become habit when repeated, and then finally one does become enslaved, the scripture says. So that a man will eventually say to alcohol, I take thee until death do us part, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer. But there's freedom when one begins. And even after one has become either a drunkard or an alcoholic, there still is freedom, as is proven first of all by the fact that when one recovers from a bout with alcohol, he will generally debate with himself before starting again. He will say, now I told my wife I would not drink anymore, or I took a pledge, or I hate to go back in the hospital with another case of DTs. That's a free man who's debating. And as he's recovering from alcohol, he'll have remorse. One never has remorse for that for which one is not responsible. Then they will give all manner of excuses. For example, oh, my wife doesn't understand me. Business is bad. They give excuses because they recognize some kind of guilt, and there's a recognition of guilt because there is some kind of liberty. And here's another evidence of the fact that there's some kind of freedom there. And that it's not just a disease like diabetes or a speck in the eye. They'll never be cured. We start with that assumption. Just look at the ex-alcoholics. I do not believe that there's a single class of men in the world who are more anxious to stand before their fellow man and parade their alcoholism. They will affirm that they were down in the gutter. Then they will say, see what I am now. They parade themselves before others as an example of sobriety and temperance. Well, would they do that if they recovered from a disease like tuberculosis? Here they want everyone to praise them, or else they want everyone to emulate them. But if they want everyone to praise them, should they not be blamed for the condition into which they originally placed themselves? There has to be freedom somewhere, either for praise or for blame. So there is an area of freedom. Point number 2, one must will to recover from alcohol. It is not just enough to want to recover. It is not enough to wish to recover. In that tiny little area of freedom, a man still has a little determination, self-determination. Some really do not want to recover because they do not want to put forth the effort. When our blessed Lord came to the paralyzed man, he said, wilt thou be made whole? Not do you wish, but is there a will, whatever the cost? You remember when St. Augustine was, before his conversion, he was living a life of sin. He said, dear Lord, I want to be better. Not now, but a little later on. He had the wish, but not the will. The pledge is not to be sneered at. The pledge is to induce an alcoholic to make an act of will and to witness it before God. Now, every one of the cases that I mentioned, they had to make an act of will. Matt Talbot had to make it. And this is how his happened. talk about lost weekends. Poor Matt didn't have lost weekends. He had lost weeks. And he didn't work this particular week. And he needed a drink Saturday, and he went down to Pemberton's because the boys were coming out, all of his fellow workmen, and he had treated them for years. And they passed him by. He said, hello, Matt, good evening, Matt. And they let him go by. Not one of them bought poor Matt a drink. He went home, and his mother says, Matt, Saturday, home early, sober. He says, Mother, I'm going to take the pledge. He says, Matt, don't take the pledge unless you're going to keep it. He said, I am willed to take that pledge. He took it. He took it only for 3 months, but he took it. Now, my friend, Percival, he was out on the park bench at Hyde Park. He was just getting over from delirium tremens, and he said to himself, I'm just a devil. I will to become a saint. It was easy to say. But some more effort was required. But at any rate, there was the will. And this alcoholic woman, she came to me, I said, listen, you love alcohol more than you love anything else in all the world. You'll never get rid of alcohol until you find something else you love more. You cannot push out alcoholism. You've got to crowd it out by bringing in another affection, an expulsive affection. So I spoke to her for an hour and a half. Lord, our Lord, particularly his crucifixion. I said, now it's up to you to decide whether or not you love the Lord more than you love alcohol. She made an act of will. But that is not the end. Though there is an area of freedom, though an act of the will is necessary, there must always be, for the cure of a drunkard or an alcoholic, there must always be the intervention of an outside and divine power and strength. The eye does not supply its own light. The ear does not supply its own harmony, nor the stomach its own food. And it's easy for man to go downward. He just merely needs to let himself go. But to pull himself up, he needs some outside strength. And that comes from God. And the moment that there is the conjunction of this act of will, along with this power, which is gratis, and therefore called grace, then begins the recovery with a certain condition, which we will mention. If, for example, I had a ball in my hand, and I rolled it across the stage, threw it across the stage, it would go in a straight line, unless it were diverted by a superior power. Now, an alcoholic is going in the direction of complete dereliction, unless there's a superior power that diverts it. When our blessed Lord therefore came to the paralyzed man who for 38 years had been on his bed, our Lord said to him, arise, take up thy bed and walk. Arise? How could he arise? After he had said, wilt thou be made whole? That was the trouble with him. He could not arise. But it made sense because our blessed Lord was saying, of and by yourself you cannot, but with the power that I give you, you can. Arise, take up thy bed. No relapse, no going back to this, and walk. Depend on yourself. No outside support. This power will come to all men, but this is what is often forgotten in the cure. When one is addicted to any vice, and particularly this, the cure never comes without passing through an additional crisis in which it would seem that there is a summary of all the temptations of the past life and all of the temptations that one would have even to the crack of doom. That was the case with Matt. The week after Matt took the pledge, he said to his mother, "I can't stand this anymore." He went down to the saloon, and they all offered him a drink. He almost dropped dead when he ordered seltzer water. Did you ever hear what W.C. Fields once said when he was asked if he wanted soda water in his alcohol? He said, "I can't stand the noise." And Matt ran out of the saloon, and he was impelled to go back. And Matt said that he never had a passion for alcohol as he did that night. And though a church was closed, he went and threw himself on a church step. And he prayed there for 4 hours, and finally it passed. He never was tempted again. And Pat used to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and pray, slept on a wooden bed, did all manner of penances. When he died at the age of 69, the Irish Independent of Dublin said, "An unknown man dropped dead on Granby Street yesterday." But everybody today knows that unknown man, Matt Talbot. One day will be the patron saint of all alcoholics. He passed through the crises. And so with Percy, he went into church and he couldn't stand it anymore, and he ran down the middle aisle. And then he said he felt as if he were tearing out his own heart. As he turned around and knelt for a blessing. And this alcoholic woman told me that she found some alcohol in one of the bottles in her museum room. And she said she wanted that more than she ever wanted anything else in all her life. She was about to take it, and she heard a voice saying, "You love this more than me." And she struggled with it and prayed and fought. She spent the rest of her life taking care of drunkards, not just alcoholics, poorest of God's poor. There are no hopeless cases. In any order, in any field, in any city. What makes for hopelessness is telling people that they're under an impulsion and they have no responsibility for the cure, and that they can do nothing. They can do something. Every human being in the world is an altar. And on that altar of self, not goats and bullocks and sheep are sacrificed, but our vices and our concupiscences, our excesses and our indulgences, and our love of alcohol. All of these are immolated on that altar. And a man begins to be free when he knows how to make that immolation. Excuse me, I was looking at the clock to see if I had time. And to all the alcoholics in the world, it's worth remembering that atonement had to be made for alcoholism because it is a sin. There is responsibility. And he who came in this earth to redeem the world took upon himself the sins of the alcoholic, and for all of their excesses, he uttered from the cross the words, "I thirst. I thirst to be thirsted for by the drunkards and by the alcoholics who hear my word. If any man thirst, let him come to me."
In this studio. You would never believe it, but we were 8 minutes late getting started. We had a flat tire, really. Flat tire on one of the sound trucks or something here. This talk is on poverty. It was not suggested by this particular incident, but there was one of the pastors who was in very grave need, and he wrote to me and told me that he had no housekeeper, and he received no help from the people and was in dire poverty. And so I sent him something. A month later, he wrote in again, a second appeal, and I sent him something. But I evidently did not send enough. because the third month he wrote in and said, "This is no appeal. This is a report. I have no pants." Just how much property can one own? I heard of a little boy who, in fact, it was an uncle came and "You want some ice cream?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "How many cones do you want?" I said, 5 cones. And I could eat only 3. He said, "See? Too much ice cream." I said, "No, not enough boy." This telecast is concerned with property and poverty. Almost all of our discussions today are about the problem of poverty. I wonder if we do not also have the problem of property. Would we ever have poverty if we did not have property? Would we ever have poverty if there was not a concentration of property? And you always have the greatest poverty in those areas where there is also the greatest wealth. And furthermore, psychologically, property, the ownership of property, does very much affect our thinking. We do not think the same without it as we do with it. In the gospel, it's very evident. Remember, our blessed Lord said to the rich young man, "Come, follow me." And the rich young man would not. Why? He had great possessions. That affected his vocation. And our Lord told a story about an invitation to a banquet, and one man said he couldn't come. He bought a yoke of oxen and had to try them. And another one bought a farm and had to see it. And coming up to our own times, what creates the problem of open housing? The fact that property owners do not want open housing. So, in suburbs, they will pass zoning laws. You're allowed only to construct so many houses a block. Well, that makes the property very expensive. So that if a lot costs $15,000, $20,000, you can't put up a $12,000 house on it. So this is a way by which property owners keep out poor. And this is what communism, too, explains in a negative way. A farmer was once visited by a communist. And the communist said to him, "I want to explain to you how our great system works. You see, if I have 100 cows, I give you 50. That's communism. If I have 20 horses, I give you 10. The farmer says, "That's very good. Now let me see if I understand it. If you have 20 pigs, I get 10. "Oh, no, you know I've got 20 pigs." Ownership. And it affects it even in the area of religion. Very much so. When religion begins to accumulate property, thinking changes. Just try to give away a church. Try it. Oh, I know the excuses. Property is mine. It's ours. You can see the value of the vow of poverty. One of the reasons why the church in Poland is so very strong is because and says, we have nothing, you can't take anything away from us, then we're not afraid. The vow of poverty was really meant to make our thinking clear. Our powers of dispossession are greater than our powers of possession. I cannot get the whole world into my hands, but I can wash the world in my hands. That's what made St. Francis great, remember? He was giving away some of his father's cotton, bales of it. And the father chided him. He had to respect his property. St. Francis said to his father, up until now, I have called you Pietro Bernardoni my father. From this moment on, I call no one father but God. And he stripped off his clothing, every piece of it except one, and that was a hair shirt. And he went out and walked the frozen ground between the frosty trees. He could see himself as foolish as a fly on a window pane. He could see luminous letters across his path as he walked. He could see the word fool written. And that's what he would go on being, the court fool of the King of Paradise. He was now without property, and he could influence the world to be poor in spirit. Believe me, this is the one big problem we have to face today. Not just poverty. It's been driven home to me in 1,000 ways. And I wish I could tell you. I'm not bald. Therefore, I can use this example. No matter how many hairs you have in your head, it hurts to have one pulled out. No matter how much wealth the person has, he hates to have $1 pulled out of his head or his pocket. So, this is the psychological effect of property. Now, let us go a little further into it and ask ourselves, if in the lower kingdom, the animal kingdom, if property is basic. There have been some very interesting studies made on this subject. One made by Konrad Lorenz, in his well-known work, Aggression. The other was by Robert Arbery, Territorial Imperative. And both of these scientists have shown that the basic instinct in animals is the territory, the right for territory. Why do they fight? For the same reason we fight. Why are they aggressive? For their property. One animal chases another. Maybe we've sometimes seen this. One animal chasing another, and then suddenly they will reverse. Why is that? It's because each animal gets braver in his own territory. They say you can predict which animal would win in a fight, namely the one that's on his own territory. I wonder if cockfighters have ever thought of that. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? To apply the psychology to cockfights and so have the cockfight always in your own territory, then they'll win. That was the idea. A German scientist by the name of Koenig spent a lot of time with rats. He had trained rats, and he allowed them to crawl over his desk and run around the room, and he fed them from his hand, and they became friends of his. And after they were friends of his, they had a cage in the corner. He let in some wild rats. And immediately a battle started. For what? territory. That was their province. And they fought and fought until they were finally driven back to the cage. Why do robins sing? Either to announce the ownership of property or to frighten off others, so these scientists say. Incidentally, a robin, think of how much watching had to be done to get these statistics. A robin, when it has young, will make 29 trips an hour for caterpillars. Bring back between 2 and 3 caterpillars. You heard what I said, didn't you? Each trip, which amounts to about 1,000 caterpillars a day. And then in addition to that, they carry away the fecal matter from the nest. That is not to the point of territory. That's just an interesting fact that I gave you because I wanted to pronounce again the word caterpillar. But as regards territory, one scientist, knowing the territory of this particular robin, put a stuffed robin on a stick at the end of the yard. And this robin immediately attacked the stuffed robin, flew around it in rage, and singing and chiding. Then the scientist took the pole away and the stuffed robin. What do you think the other robin did? He kept flying around the place where the pole was and where the stuffed robin was, asserting his rights to property. Now, I could give you many more instances of these animal habits. But what do they prove? They prove, first of all, Freud was wrong. So everybody's talking about Freud and sex. Better get busy now on these new advanced thinkers. It's not sex so much, it's property. So one of the chapters in the work of Arbery is organization without love. Organization of the nest and the protection of the nest and the territory. And how do they know the territory? They don't draw lines, but ants and termites and so forth know their territories by smell and know who belongs in that particular smell. Freud was wrong, so also was communism. Communism, you see, is not natural. It's not in the animal kingdom. Property is not common. Now, so far, I have tried to show you that property influences our thinking. We cannot think straight with it. And also that it is an instinct that is so deep in us that it's in the animal kingdom. Incidentally, the reason for property, is to perfect our existence. Our being is very imperfect. And because we're imperfect, we have to have. And the having adds to our being. That's why people that are very naked on the inside will have a great display of luxury on the outside. But I'm not going